Good morning, everyone. It is Monday morning, July 28th, and it is time for another Indiana Organic Network webinar. Our webinar series has taken place throughout 2025. We've had a couple of webinars for specialty crop producers, and now we're switching gears and moving into our row crop slash organic grain set of webinars. And our first webinar in that part of our webinar series is considerations for transitioning to organic. My name is Ashley Adair. I'm the Extension Organic Agriculture Specialist working on the Indiana Organic Network project, and I'm here at Purdue University, and I am joined by Brian Overstreet. Brian, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Brian Overstreet. I'm with Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative and Purdue Extension as their conservation agronomist, predominantly in northern Indiana, but I can be wherever I need to be on that project. And also on this Indiana Organic Grain Network grant too. So working with the organic farmers on that side.
We are pleased to have you join us today. This webinar is recorded, so if you'd like to return to this at another point in time and refresh your memory, you can find the recordings of this webinar and all of our other webinars on the Indiana Organic Network website. So Brian and I will be tag teaming this webinar this morning. So we'll get started with Brian to start, and then I'll round out the latter half of the presentation. So Brian, we'll have you take it away.
All right, why are we growing organic crops? And so the reasons we might want to be doing that is because the sales of organic products in the United States has soared 18 times in the last uh, several years to from up to $7.1 billion in 2024. Most organic soybeans in the US are being satisfied for by imports. So why shouldn't we be growing them here when we have the capability of doing that? It'd be a lot cheaper in the market to get them without the transportation and other issues going on right now of getting things imported into the United States. So it'd make more sense to grow them here because we've got more than better capabilities of doing that. And it also can build our farms resilience to the climate change and to the weather patterns that we've been facing this over the last several years and how it's changing with longer, drier periods in the summer and sometimes wetter springs, depending on the year. But we do build that resilience so we can get through these more harder times with the weather that we've been having the last several years. Next. What does it mean to become a certified organic? To become a certified organic here in the United States, there is a national organic program that is federally regulated as a framework that has the regulations that are followed, and there's a code of federal regulations that you can go to at this website, the ecfr.gov dot slash current, then the Title 7, Title B, and as you can see, it's a long site there, but we can put that probably in the chat, and so you can download that later and do that. But it takes when you are switching over, it's a 3-year transition period that's required before you can sell products as organic. So we're going to go through some of that process today on doing that, that's done. And the in the National Organic Program and USDA doesn't certify you as organic, but it has a third party that will accreditate you to do this. So we go through on how to contact those, but the organic ams.usda.gov integrity site is where you would go to get the list of those accredited parties that will come through. They will inspect your farm, go through your records, make sure that you're doing things according to the regulations to let you get certified as an organic. And generally, the biggest thing with being organic is there's no no or very few synthetic inputs that you can use in production in your organic crops. So that's the biggest thing with organic is that you're re reducing or not using any synthetic inputs. There are a few exceptions that may be able to use at times, but for the most part, you cannot use those synthetic inputs anymore. Next, why? So, what does it really mean to become certified organic? And because it's more than just growing, following those laws and regulations. It generally, for the most part, you're going to have a diverse crop rotation. So it's not just going to be corn, soybeans like we've done in the past, or maybe throw in some wheat in that. So you're going to be doing a different rotation than you might have been used to. You're going to probably get used to working with less tools to control your weeds, insects, and diseases, because we eliminate all those synthetic products that we've been using over in the past. So, we may be learning how to use new tools to control those or weeds and insects that we hadn't been using in the past, and using and but we can also still be incorporating the precision ag technology with these organic inputs, especially with the cultivators and things like that. It can be a very helpful tool if you have the precision ag along with that, the RTK. We can be cultivating, not taking out rows of our crops as we're planting that. So used to say when I was a kid, we'd have iron blight when we get off that row a little bit cultivating. So that RTK and the GPS can make that so much more efficient. With doing that, you're going to be staying out of those rows so much better. Uh, but and through that, you can, as we're doing this, we can measure our progress as the more years we're doing in the organic, looking at where we're doing on our weed controls and insect controls. And with that, through those things, we can kind of follow those as we go through that process. But the biggest thing is getting used to different management tools that we haven't been using in the past to to control some of the pests that we still contend with. Next. So we're one of the things you need to realize that we're probably going to be committing more hours through the farm through the season doing organic, because you are going to probably be making more passes across that field, or different passes that not that you're not going through as fast. You're not going to be cultivating near as fast as you would be spraying herbicides and things like that. So you're going to be spending more time through the field. You'll probably be scouting more times because watching for more issues and things like that. Um, but I mean, one of the reasons that we want to look at sort of a lot of people look at organic is because you get a premium price in organic crops, but you got to look beyond that. You need to look at the holistic approach that you're doing and what you're doing to the farm, how we're making the soils more healthy and the environment more healthy by going organic. So there's more to it than just being following the regulations. There's a bigger scope that we need to be looking at. You're going to be spending a lot more time looking for new markets and finding those, because critical to find markets was one of the first things that we need to do if we think about doing organic, is looking for what markets you do have to sell those, because it's not like the commodities that we've been growing that you just haul them to the local elevator and sell them and you don't worry about it. You always have a market just down the road generally to haul your grain to. With organic, there's a lot of niche markets that you could be looking for. Um, Breweries, distilleries, different places that may want to use the grain for flour and things like that. So other markets that you may be looking for. And you're really going to need to keep well organized records to keep your certification up when that auditor comes in to check those and evaluate it. That to get you accredited, you have to show those records of what you've done on every field. Um, what fertilizers you used, what your approach was for weed control, and those type of things. So keeping those records are very key in doing that. And you're going to have neighborly, some more neighborly conversations generally. They can be good conversations. They can be a challenge conversations because generally, a lot of times you may have more weeds than what you'd had in the past, and keeping those under control can be a challenge, and that can upset some of the neighbors, especially depending on what the weeds are and how those seeds can be moved. So that can be a challenge with this conversion to organic, but if you can explain why you're doing it and the holistic approach that you're following, generally you can work with that neighbors, but it can be a little different with those the neighbors when you do that switch because it's a little different than what they're used to and how things have been done in the past. Next. So when you're thinking about going organic, how do we get started? So this is the things that we need to start thinking about before we even do start converting any acres over into this because it's a different approach than what we've been doing. There's a lot more challenges than what that the typical farming or conventional farming has been the last several years. So one of the things you need to do is learn as much as you can before you start. Look, attend as many organic farming events that you can with through Extension, any organic network. There's some nonprofits in the region that also do several programs. So, and work with organic consultants. Work with those places that you need that have been doing it. Talk to farmers that have been doing it to see what their experiences were. Start building a list of your contacts through the organic industry that you may need to use for marketing or equipment and or supply inputs that you may be needing. So start building that list before you get started doing that. Start looking at where you can get those inputs and how much they're going to cost getting into it, and where you're going to get those inputs at, how much, when can you get them, the understanding all the process of that. And then start to do as much reading as you can about this, and then do and get things planned that on how it's been done in the past, things that are looking at new things that they may be looking at in the future, that how we can make things work better with the organic system. And also make sure you're starting to look for markets that you're going to be doing. I mean, yeah, it's great to grow this product, but you still have to be able to sell it and have a place that you can make some income with that. So make sure that you start looking for your markets before you get too far into it. Next. Figure out where you're going to get those inputs at. So the uh, a lot of the inputs are the fertilizers that we may be using. So you can look at different types of fertilizers. The hog manure, I mean, with approximately 50 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. Chicken litters, another one that depends on where you're at in the state, can be very valuable and easy to get at places. Beef manure is another one that you can use. It's not near as high quality or high amount of nitrogen per ton as some of the other manures, and dairy's even less. But and you could maybe getting dairy manure as a liquid or a dry, depending on where you're at and how close you are to some of the dairies. You got to figure all these. You got to figure in the cost of these trucking to get it to you. The liquids, you want to probably within 10 miles of where the farm is because it's just you're hauling a lot of water. And so the cost is generally um, prohibitive once you get past that 10, 15 miles because of the trucking. Dry manures, you can haul a lot farther. You can stockpile those a lot better and keep those. Make sure that you follow the rules for stockpiling if you do stockpile more than the the limit that you can stockpile manures for a certain many amount of days, but you need to dike it or have it covered if you do keep it over. I think it's 40 days, but you have to check with the state chemist on that process on the program. Next. One of the things you want to do, especially on manures, are get it analyzed. There's a few labs in the area that you can do that with. Make sure that you know what you're actually putting on because they can be widely variable. As you see in this chart, the lines that go up and down on these bars are the range that you could have in these processes. So, like the total manure on the swine liquid can go from 20 to 70. So depending on where you're at, the phosphoruses and potassiums can have a wide range also on all those. So, um, and you look at when you are looking at these, you want to look at kind of where you're at on how much these nutrients are. So if you look poultry manure, you're going to have a lot higher phosphorus and potassium level uh, uh, than you are on the other animals. So you don't need as much of that to watch your P and K levels on those versus the others. But and it depends on, and it can see which types of nitrogen are in those two. You get the ammonium is very low in the poultry, but it's fairly high levels of total in that. So you can look at those type of things. Beef, your little things are lower on that, but it still does have a wide range across theirs on those ranges. So make sure you analyze it on those. You look at that dairy liquid, the potassium can have a wide range of basically nothing to almost 70 pounds. So it's make sure you analyze that, get that manure analyzed when you get it or from your source and see what you actually are putting on because we want to make sure we have enough to get the crop done, but we don't want to be over fertilizing too, and that can cause issues in the long run. Next. Figure out some. We're also looking at your other imports. So, mineral-based products you may be getting is some gypsum, lime. For the most part, we can get from a lot of places, but that lime can be variable too, depending on where you're getting at it. Getting it from southern Indiana's lime versus northern Indiana's lime is a little different, and even Corey from Corey can be different. So, get that analyzed to see what you're doing and where you're getting it from. Uh, that's another one of those. Well, and gypsum too can depend on the trucking on how far you want to ship it to, and the cost can vary a lot on that. Ross phosphate's another one that you may be able to use. It takes quite a while for that to break down, but it's a available phosphate that we can use. It's a for organic, and we can at an economical rate, but it's not it can take a while for it to break down to be effective. So that's where the phosphates and the fertilizer are going to be effective, or the manures are going to be a lot effective a lot longer or a lot sooner. Uh, but over the long run, that rock phosphate can be an option for that. Seed is one that we need to source for an organic source. If none is available, you may be able to use non-or or GMOs, but you need to make sure you have all the documentation. Make sure you talk to your the group that you're doing for your accreditation to make sure it follows their guidelines. And so it makes sure that it all lines up to those uh, um, those levels. But and the seeds must be not treated. Um, and unless it's treated by an approved organic product that you could treat it with, but for the most part, they cannot be treated. Even your cover crops that you use, you need to try it to, if you can, um, get the organic cover crops too. But those are ones that you may be able to work with your accreditation if they're non-GMO to use that. But try to get as much as you can the organic sources of those seeds if you can. But always check with your accredited group before you do that. with the
And
seeds.
just to jump in real quick for seed sourcing and the documentation that's required, you will be required to do a seed search with three dealers of organic seed to confirm that the variety of the particular seed, whether it's cover crop or crop seed, you have to confirm that with three different companies that they did not have that particular variety of that particular species available. So that's what we mean by seed search documentation. It can be emails, it can be screenshots, just as long as you are keeping track of that in your certification paperwork, then you can use a non-GMO seed. But if there is a single place where you can find of those three that that seed is available, you will be required to use that. If there are further questions about that, we'd be happy to talk over the phone or via email, and we'll share our contact information at the end.
We're ready for the next one, I think. Um, if you're thinking about or when we start looking at those market opportunities, um, during the transition period is a challenge because you're not marketing things at organic prices, but you're going to be you're probably limiting your yield some because you're switching over and doing that process over. And so that can be a challenge those first few years. So some of the markets you might be able to do is a non-GMO grain. A lot of markets now we can get a premium on some if you're growing non-GMOs. So search for those areas. Um, and then sometimes you may find even a certified transitional market, but the odds aren't very high. I mean, it's not very common to find that, but you may find that something. You just sell as conventional is one of the options that that's probably the easiest thing, but like you said, your margins aren't going to be as well because those first couple of years, your yields may not be as good because you're switching things over, and there's but you depends on what you're growing to. If you're growing a hay market or growing some hay, alfalfa or something, those first years or two, you'll be able to sell that and still be in good shape as a hay market. But going some of the other products, you may not be. So look at what you are going through those transition periods as you're doing that. Um, you may sell it as a feed grain as that transition. So depending on the market, they may want something that's um that's in that kind of in between stage. It's not organic yet, but you're working that way. So they depends on how they're marketing their animals from the feed, and they may be wanting something that's in that transition period. Food grade. Um, and once you get to the organic markets, uh, they are definitely looking for feed for these sources for these animals that they can use for organic. So I know there's several organic dairies and organic beef areas and organic swine too that are looking for those feed grade feeds or grain that's easy to do. For food grade, organic is can be a higher standard to sell, cleaner grains. Some of those grains are maybe a little even more niche market, maybe looking at purple corn or white corn or blue corn or different colors that they use for different processes. And even some still yellow corn, but they're used for different processes on that for the food grade, but it's a little higher standard on the the quality of the grain, the being less weed free and those type of things are going to be a challenge too. So, and you may even start looking at vertical integration or on-site processing, direct sales of your organic products. Could be a challenge, and more expensive processing equipment, and bagging equipment and grinding and things like that. So, but you may have be able to sell a flour or a cornmeal or something like that through a direct market. I know one gentleman that does. He's got a seed cleaner. Brings in, cleans everything, and then does a milling process that does it. And he uses it, and he's kind of joint venture between somebody in another state, and they kind of move this process back and forth between them and sell that. But so it can be done, but it can be a lot more intense. It may be one that you may want to work with other farmers in your area that are doing organic and make a work together to make a co-op or a LLC or something that you're a joint venture on something like that to make it have it. But once you do that, you still it's going to add a lot more time on marketing and being able to sell that product once you do have your product. So it adds more challenge to it on the other end also. Anything to add to that, Ashley?
No, I think you covered it well. In general, folks are going to start out being at feed grade for their organic sales. And like Brian mentioned, we have a number of different livestock species in Indiana that will be in the organic marketplace, and poultry in particular is a big one, especially in the northeast part of the state. So if you're considering doing this, look at your feed grade opportunities first. That market has matured somewhat in the last 5 to 10 years, so the premiums are not as high as they once were, but it's still a slightly more reliable market to be in than some of the food grade or the potential vertical integration opportunities. So get yourself a good foundation, finding some type of feed grade marketplace for your grain, and then you can diversify your markets from there.
And look at what grains that those feed grains are wanting too. I know it depends on what they're feeding in their mixes and what how much they need of each one. So kind of look what they're wanting and kind of balance your ration or your plan on that when you're doing that. Now, next thing you want to do is while you're getting things lined up is make sure you got a certifier. So, like I said earlier, the USDA doesn't do certifications, but they go through an accreditation group we that you work with and that certifies you. They'll come and inspect your farm, inspect your records, make sure that everything's correct to do that. So to be uh, certified as organic. So make sure there's several across the state that you can work with. You can go to this website and pull up the list of them. Make sure that you get lined up with your certifier earlier than later. Make sure you're doing all the steps through that transition period, when you need to be doing them, how you need to be doing them, because if you miss jumping through all the hoops, if you miss one of the hoops, it can mess up the whole system. You gotta go back and get that hoop fixed. So it's not, it can be time consuming and lengthy if you do something wrong at the big, somewhere in the middle that you thought you were going through right, and you have to go back to the beginning. So make sure you're doing things right. The most of the paperwork is going to be similar between these certifiers, but some of them may charge different prices. Some are going to may give you a lot more service than others. Um, some have a lot more experience than others too. So um, find a certifier that works for you, works with your system, uh, works for how helps. I mean, you may not need that much hands-on, or you may need a lot of hands-on. So to find one that can work with you on those type of things and walk you through the process and make it an enjoyable process that you can get through and make it a profitable adventure for you at the end. And one of the big things is you don't want to jump into this thing whole hog. It's something you need to learn how you're doing. And it's a process. It's a whole different management system than we've been used to in commercial grain in the past. So you may want to start slow, do 10% or less of your total acres that first time and when you're getting started. Um, because it can be an expensive process through that transition period to get switched over. So keep do small amounts, so then keep the rest of your farm more profitable as you're switching over to the organic. Once you get to the organic, it can be very profitable in that, but that 3 year period in between can be a challenge. So, um, and you're learning whole new practices of weed management and pest management that we haven't been doing for a long time. It's so we're looking at doing that, looking at you realize you can learn how much more labor it's going to take to do this organic farm versus what you've been doing in the past. So you can kind of look at that. You may want to start on some of your best fields as you're doing this to get a sense of what it's going to do yield wise in those processes, and looking at that program as you're going through. But it's a learning experience through this period, that transition period on how to do this organic farming, and so going that 10% or less gives you a feel of what it's going to be like and how it's done, and you can kind of learn as you go through that and make it more more relaxing as you do it as you go through once you understand how how this works. So but then as you're looking at we talked a little bit about the marketing those transition fields, and this is where that alfalfa as a transition makes it nice because you can still sell that as hay pretty easily. There's not a lot of near as much management changes on it as there some of the other cropping systems that we've been doing. If you're set up for alfalfa as a hay crop, so it may be something that you hadn't been doing in the past if you were just corn, soybeans, and not alfalfa. So it may not be something that fits your system, but if you could make it work. There's generally a lot of places, there's people around that do custom hay baling and stuff. So even if you don't have all the equipment there, you can easily do that, easy to go into that. And it's a easy one to go into. You may not be as much as on the learning side of it going through that period, but it may be something that once you have converted some over to organic and you're trying to convert more over, that may be one that fits in very well in those places that gets it switched over as you're working on building up your base on your true organic farms as you're going across that. So maybe where it fits in, but it's also going from alfalfa to corn that first year is great because you're building up that nitrogen for that crop going into that first year of organic. So I think it could fit in great with your rotation in the future going into that. So one of the things that you're going to have to learn more about generally with organic is you're going to be a lot more diversified in your cropping systems than you've been in the past. You're going to not just be corn, soybeans. You're going to look at other programs. You're going to always have being working with cover crops, which you can be growing them for seed for next year's. You could be just growing the cover crop for soils. You could be helping build the soil up. You could be helping keeping those nutrients that were there, keeping them in that field. You could be building up nitrogen for your next crop. So you're going to have cover crops in your system because that's could be one of the key ways of building up that nitrogen and air fertility for that next cover or next crop, especially if you're going into corn or a wheat or a program that needs nitrogen. You're going to need to build up that nitrogen somehow or another. So, and it's a great way where you can add the manure, but using those cover crops is another great way we can do that and environmentally safe and keep that ground covered and keep that soil there while we're doing that. So, sunflowers is another market that we can grow. We can do that actually after if we do oats or wheat, we can get harvest those early and then get in a sunflower crop in and get a second crop throughout the year. And there's barley's one that we may see as a market if you have a market for it. Dry edible beans can be a challenge with the weather conditions we have here, but look at your soils, look at your weather conditions. It can be grown there, but they don't like wet feet very well, so that's one that we need to be careful on where we grow that and how we grow it. But it can be done. Um, but and sorghum is a good one, especially if you got lighter, sandier soils, is an excellent opportunity versus trying to grow corn or soybeans sometimes too in that rotation. It works out well. So, but we're going to be maybe looking at different crops that we haven't had in the past. Work with your insurance agents or crop insurance. Make sure that we get all the paperwork that if that can cover if for insurance purposes that it will cover these new crops that you haven't been growing. Generally, you may need to talk to your extension educator to have them um, work with the extension the uh, insurance educator agent to make sure we got the paperwork that says, okay, this crop can be grown in Indiana or wherever you're at, that and which part of the state you're in too, that it can be grown here, because they can look at records from other crops, similar crops or places they have grown them and look at your soil types and do that, but they need to be verified that they can be grown to get your insurance on those programs when you start looking at these crops that we haven't been growing normally.
And just want to emphasize here that cover crops are essentially a non-negotiable in organic systems. I think Brian did a good job of kind of explaining that cover crops should be emphasized in organic systems, but the regulations actually state that a cover crop should be used in most circumstances within an organic farm, whether you're growing vegetables or grains. It's just really important for helping to build up soil over time, and it helps planting cover crops helps mitigate some of the problems we run into when we have to increase the amount of tillage that we're working with on an organic farm because you can't really get away from tillage, especially as a beginner or a newly transitioning organic farmer. You have to use tillage for uh, bed prep as well as for weed control. So there's just a lot that cover crops can do to help mitigate some of the problems we run into with increased tillage.
Yeah, I mean the switch, I guess as you're switching to weed management, I mean those cover crops can help a lot on some of the weed management, especially in the spring, keeping them down. And depends on, I mean, if you're taking rye and crimping that, if you got a good mulch, you can control a lot of weeds that way, especially the grasses and some of the even some of the broadleaves can help quite a bit with that mulch.
Absolutely. And as we shift gears and talk a little bit more about weed management, which often feels like the elephant in the room when we're talking about organic farming, I want to emphasize that organic farmers should try to adopt what we would consider a more adaptive weed management approach. This is an approach that takes integrated pest management kind of to the next level. It emphasizes some deliberate learning and study of each individual field that's involved in your operation. Each field, as you well know, even as a conventional farmer, you know that each field is going to behave a little bit differently throughout the season, has different weed populations. The seed bank might be deeper or shallower. These fields are going to behave differently from year to year and from decade to decade. And so, with changing conditions, changing cropping practices, changing tillage, you're going to see some differences in a field that was managed conventionally when you convert it to organic. You might be dredging up seeds from the seed bank that were dormant and down a little bit deeper, and you're going to see some species you may not expect to see, even if you have been managing this field conventionally for a long time. So, in this particular example, this is an aerial image from Montgomery County. This is not an organic field. This is a conventional field, but it's in a kind of a unique position in the county. It's located near the city of Crawfordsville, and it's kind of hard to get to. And this field has a lot of Canada thistle in it. Those little circular patches that you see there are all Canada thistle colonies that have taken root because this was managed as forages before it was converted to row crop. And so that's kind of a unique characteristic of this particular field. And it's one that I might not recommend transitioning to organic until you can use conventional management practices to get some of that Canada thistle under control. And even so, Canada thistle is still going to be a pain in your butt as you transition to organic. So consider some of your adaptive management strategies. Maybe that adaptive management strategy is choosing to convert some of these more challenging fields later on. Maybe that strategy is varying your tillage timing and tillage tools to control certain types of weeds. You'll have to get to know weed biology in a different way, or maybe go back to the old ways of understanding weed biology and considering that tillage is not always a great way to manage perennials where you can just spread the rhizomes around all over the field. So there's definitely a lot to learn. There's a lot to study on each individual field, and that's another big reason that we typically recommend transitioning no more than 10% of your acreage at a time to organic. Before we move on to the next slide, too, I want to mention that equipment sanitation is going to become a more serious issue as you are using tillage equipment, especially. So, if you're bringing a cultivator or a tine weeder into a field like this that may have some perennials or some annuals that spread easily, you're going to want to make sure that you are using compressed air or you're using water to clean your equipment off before you take it into another field that might be vulnerable to an infestation such as this. Uh, Sanitation is also part of the organic regulations when it comes to running a parallel operation, which means you're running conventional alongside organic. So if you have shared equipment, you will also have to wash or use compressed air to clean that equipment. But just another consideration to make, whether you're farming parallel production or whether you're all organic, is to make sure that your equipment is well sanitized before, or well cleaned, not necessarily sanitized, but well cleaned before entering new fields. So, since herbicides are no longer part of your management strategy, you must consider some other tools and strategies to use for weed control. Some of this happens in the field, so thinking about cultivation and different types of cultivation equipment that you might use. There's a lot of different types of tools, a lot of different methods, I guess you could say, of using steel to manage weeds in at different depths, in different manners. A tine weeder and a rotary hoe and a row cultivator are all different types of equipment that have similar goals but might be used in different circumstances. So there's a lot to learn where mentorship from more experienced organic farmers and some of those books you can find can really help give you a good foundation on some of those agronomic considerations to make when you are controlling weeds. But there's other tools that are available as well. Some of them are kind of exciting, I guess you could say. So flame weeders are a tool that I guess you could say is somewhat popular out there in organic row crop world. So that image there on the right, that's an example of what a cornfield might look like after a pass with a flame weeder. So a flame weeder, if you're not familiar, is essentially just a bunch of propane torches mounted to a toolbar that also has a big propane tank on top of it. So can be a little bit nerve-wracking for a new grower to use for the first time, and it does take some experience dialing in your calibration to make sure that you are, quote, applying the right amount of heat to control weeds without damaging the crop. It's often used in the corn section of the crop rotation because if the meristem of the corn is underground, the rest of the plant is for the most part protected from heat damage from the flames, and you're passing over the area just quick enough that you'll kill things like foxtail and some of the broadleaves without damaging the corn. But your corn is going to look real funny to your neighbor. So anybody who's driving by that you have a good enough relationship with to, be on texting or calling basis, they're going to be asking you what the heck you did in your field. So a little bit of a social thing there as well. It's definitely interesting for passersby to see some of this stuff that you might be doing. Another tool that you might consider is a weed electrification tool. So a common name brand of that type of tool is the Weed Zapper. You've probably heard of that one before. And that's essentially an electric generator that's mounted to your rear PTO that is connected to a toolbar that is mounted to the front of your tractor that has a copper rod that runs across it. And they're available in several different sizes. There's also several different designs that you might have access to. So there's a couple other makes out there, but by far the most common one that we see in row crops here in Indiana is the Zapper. So that's running thousands of volts of electricity through that copper bar on the front, and you're running that toolbar just above the crop canopy. So it's often a rescue weed management tool used in soybeans. So if you've got ragweed, if you've got amaranth, like one of the pig weeds, you can run this weed zapper over the crop as long as there's enough moisture in the crop, and it will basically ground out the electricity being generated from that dynamo in the back and kill the weed. There is some debate as to how systemic, so to speak, this type of application is and how much of the weed is being killed. But you can adjust your drive speed or your application speed, if you want to call it that, and adjust the voltage to a certain extent to make a bigger impact there. There's also some considerations to make, like I said, with moisture. Zappers are not very good at controlling foxtail. Foxtail is just too dry. There's just kind of too much plant material in relation to water there to really make a big dent. And if you use a zapper on crops that are too dry, or if you're kind of contending with dry wheat stubble or something else that could potentially catch flame if there's an arc, while using that machine, you can catch a field on fire. So there's nothing that has just positive consequences, I guess you could say, when it comes to weed control and organics. But utilizing different types of equipment that can handle different types of biomass, handle different species of weeds is essential for making sure that your weed management strategy is either tolerable or working well. Some other things to consider too, there are certain um, makes and models of harvesting equipment, especially combines, that can tolerate more weed biomass than others. So when you're forming those connections within the organic industry and talking with mentor farmers and figuring out what you need to do to make organic work on your operation, don't forget to consider combines, seed destruction techniques, that type of thing as well when it comes to your weed management strategy.
Yeah, I saw video the other day or watched a program on that, the seed destroyers, and where they when the seed is contacted in those destroyers, it does a very good job. Some of the issues is not all of it hits that destroyer, but it can eliminate quite a bit of the seeds. So, and on the weed zapper, another weed that does not work very well is velvet leaf. Does not zap very well either.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you adding that. Yeah, velvet leaf can be a tough one for sure. So I have just a couple of images to share with you to highlight a couple of these different types of equipment. This video might be a little bit choppy since we're doing this webinar over Zoom, but this is an example of what a zapper can do in a soybean field that has a ragweed infestation along one of the borders. If you're not able to see the video very clearly, what we're showing in this image or in this video is the zapper going along at a fairly low rate of speed, just a few miles an hour. And every time that that copper rod is contacting a ragweed plant, you are either seeing an arc, or that plant is maybe it's not arcing, but it is receiving quite a bit of damage as it is receiving this electric jolt. So the photo on the right is an example of just maybe 10, 15 minutes after the pass with the copper rod. And you can see that the top of the plant is wilted. And you can also see on the leaves here, there's some dark markings where that electricity was passing through other tissues of the plant. We would expect to see this entire ragweed plant wilting within a day or so after a pass with a zapper. So, a zapper is an example of a piece of equipment alongside cultivators and other pieces of equipment that can be used with precision ag technology and GPS guidance. So, just because you're kind of returning to an older method of farming does not mean that those technologies that you are familiar with using in your conventional system cannot be applied in an organic system. Um, However, that being said, I kind of want to go back to the labor thing a little bit too. You have all these tools at your disposal. Of course, if you want to spend your money on them, because these are these are tools that cost money, just like any conventional management tool might. But just consider some of these labor needs that you have throughout the season. There are some bottlenecks that can occur with your labor management strategy at certain times of the season when it feels like every cultivator or every zapper or whatever you have in your tool shed has to be out in the field at the same time. So having the correct number of tractors and the correct number of employees that are trained to handle these types of equipment can be a really difficult juggle, so to speak, to make sure that your weed control is happening at the right times and with the best pieces of equipment. So definitely something big to consider. Um, there are different ways to mitigate labor shortages on an organic farm. You might be able to hire qualified individuals just in the area that you live in, but there are also some organic growers that hire H-2A workers that have equipment experience that can really add um, some some good management practices to the farm, especially if you can't be in 500 places at once. Another thing, just before we move on to the next slide, in general, the figure that I hear people talk about when it comes to labor management is that you need to have one person responsible for managing roughly 500 acres. So for every 500 acres or so that you add, you need somebody who is reasonably experienced at running cultivation equipment and some of these other tools, if you have them, to make that work well. So there's that Zapper video playing again. We'll just pass that. This is just a really cool picture that I wanted to share of what a flame weeder can look like while it is running in the field. This is an image taken with a thermal camera that's mounted to a drone. And this is I believe this is a 16-row flame weeder if I'm doing a quick count. And this is in a cornfield of relatively young corn out in Fountain County. So you can see that the flame weeder is changing the temperature of the surface of the soil just enough that you can see some blue streaking that's a slightly higher temperature than the surrounding area. You can also see some of that heat dissipating into the atmosphere. Um, Again, the video might be a little bit choppy, but just playing that for you there. I believe also with this particular unit, there might be a flow rate issue onto the right-hand half of the toolbar because the temperatures out of those burners it looks like just relative to the other half, it looks like it's burning just a little bit cooler. So there can be issues with calibrating these. There can be maintenance issues with these. Whether you choose to have your propane refilled on site or have to go somewhere else to get your propane, or if you get your own propane truck, those are all considerations to make when running a flame weeder versus using other types of equipment.
And be careful with the amount of residue you have on top of the ground.
Yes. Yes, that is exactly right. So some other strategies that you may consider using include roller crimping. So there have been some successful examples of folks using roller crimping, planting green, for example, and then roller crimping. That can be a very successful strategy, especially when going into soybeans. If you have good enough rye biomass or another cover crop that you might consider rolling, if you have good enough biomass, it can be a really helpful way to establish soybeans without having to do a bunch of tillage to control your weeds. It's not perfect. It's not great for every field on every farm in every single year. The best laid plans can come up short just because of weather reasons, or maybe there's extraneous factors with your labor situation, or you're having family situations that might prevent best establishment. There's all kinds of things that can happen that whether you're farming conventionally or organically can become an issue. So this is not always a perfect strategy every single time, but again, kind of getting into this adaptive mindset, being able to roll with the punches, that is sometimes very stressful, but not being super rigid about your strategy when it comes to organic farming is going to be the best way to move forward. So this is arguably the most soil-friendly strategy for doing weed control and planting on an organic farm. It's not always common to find a front mount tractor that you can do a roller crimp and a seeding in the same pass. But if that is available to you, that saves you a trip across the field, and can get everything done at maybe the ideal timing for you. You would have to consider using a high residue planter or drill for this kind of operation. And as far as rye biomass goes, you need a minimum of 5,000 pounds of rye biomass per acre and kind of up to a maximum of 8,000 pounds per acre to make this work. Also, in most places in Indiana, we would like to consider having an early maturing, long internode variety to make this work. Early maturing because that means you can get your soybean or whatever other crop, but likely soybeans, planted as early as possible, as soon as the soils are ready. And the long internodes make for better roller crimping. So that crimper has more space to roll up the stem of the plant and make sure to get a good kill rather than the shorter internode varieties that might be a little bit more resistant to a roller crimp kill. So a few different strategies there to think about when it comes to reducing tillage on an organic farm. This image actually comes from Practical Farmers of Iowa. There's quite a few resources over there and a good community of practice over there of folks that use these types of management strategies. So just because a resource doesn't necessarily come from Indiana doesn't mean it doesn't have relevance to you and your farm and your organic transition strategy. So just consider that as one of many places to learn more about these types of techniques.
And if you don't have the crimper to put on the front of the tractor, I I think of past, I think it's you get a better seed soil can contact if you run the drill through first, then run the crimper afterwards instead of you. But you can save a lot of uh, save a trip if you do have it set up this way. And we've also got some corn planters or and bean planters set up that they've got the crimper right on the planter too, so that in front of the planter, so they it can be done right before. But if you are making a separate trip, I recommend planting first and then crimp second.
Absolutely. So we've been talking and alluding to equipment needs off and on throughout this presentation. Just to explore that a little bit deeper with you, equipment selection is going to depend on your experience level. It's going to depend on your soils. It's going to depend on your farming system and your planned crop rotation. So some cultivation equipment to consider would include a rotary hoe, a row cultivator, and a tine weeder. Those are probably the three most essential tools to consider. You can start small if you like. You can start with a 15-foot or smaller toolbar for many of these things just to get your feet on the ground and get a good understanding of how to use them. And then as you gain more experience, you can increase the size of your equipment. As far as cover crops goes, it's a great idea to have a roller crimper in your stable as well as a drill to help make sure that your termination steps and your planting goes as smoothly as possible. Also consider high residue planting equipment and some of those alternative weed management equipment options that we discussed, like zappers and weed flamers. And then finally, if you are planning to integrate forages either as a transition strategy or as a every 5 or 6 years strategy, you're going to plant alfalfa to give your field a bit of a rest. You might want to invest in your own haying equipment or have a good buddy that you are willing to pay to do some custom haying for you. There's a lot of different opportunities to meet with equipment manufacturers and dealers in the organic industry. One of the premier opportunities for that is the Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day. We hosted that at Purdue in 2024. It was at Ohio State in 2023. And then in this year, it will be at Iowa State. So 2025 at Iowa State. And events like these and others that occur throughout the Midwest, and also winter meetings where dealers might attend or sponsor some of the organic grain conferences around the Midwest. These are great opportunities to get a sense of what these tools have to offer. And if you get to see a demo in the field, you get a little bit better understanding of how calibration works and what each of these tools looks like on different soil types. If you have sandy soils, you're going to have a different experience running a tine harrow than somebody who's running on a silty clay loam. So I think it's really important to see what some of these tools look like in operation in the field so you can get a sense of what might work best for your individual operation. So what we see here, we have a Trefler tine harrow there on the left. That is a tine harrow that uses cable tension to manage how much resistance each of those tines produces as it's running through the field. Lower resistance is gentler, higher resistance is more aggressive, and your resistance settings are determined by your soil type and the types of weeds and potentially your crop growth stage as well. The middle piece of equipment is a buffalo cultivator. So that's a piece of equipment that can handle some heavier soils. It's also got shields on it, which helps protect the growing crop in the row from being buried. So sometimes you may want to bury your crop. So soybeans can tolerate being buried to a certain extent with some of the cultivation tools, whereas corn and some of your other crops that you might be growing in rows like this may not tolerate that as well. So shielding the cultivation operation from the actual crops in the row can be important in certain circumstances. And then finally, there on the right, pretty old-fashioned tool, all things considered, is a rotary hoe. That rotary hoe can be an aggressive tool to flip weeds up out of the soil surface down to an inch or two depth and can be a really important strategy, especially when you're rotating to corn in your organic rotation. So lots of different options available there. Some other tools that you may consider, and I feel like saying this is a dirty word or a dirty phrase, but you may consider using a mold board on your operation for a few different reasons. So that there on the left is a European style of mold board plow. It's a Gregoire Basson, and that's an imported piece of equipment. It is a rotational plow. So you can plow one direction, turn around, flip the thing over, and then come back and have your profile flipped in the same direction as when you were traveling the other way. So you don't have to drive around the field as much. These tools often require a lot of horsepower. That is a seven bottom plow. So you have to have quite a bit of horsepower to run that effectively. Um, but thinking about mold boarding, reasons you might do that are for burying small seeded weeds that are becoming a problem if you've been using a lot of shallow tillage lately. It can also help redistribute some of the nutrients in the soil profile. And it can also help break new ground. So use sparingly, but it still may be worth having a tool like this in your toolbox in case you are running into some of those specific issues mentioned earlier. There's other tools available as well. So the middle tool is a finger weeder. It's a Hotzenbickler implement. That can be useful for weeding in the row and avoiding the crop itself. So say in a soybean planting, you're wanting to get some weeds out of the actual row rather than just the interrow. So that can be a way to do that. Those fingers kind of interlock. There's different grades of rubber that can be used there's a whole set of different fingers that you can attach, those little finger discs that are either more flexible or less flexible. So less flexible is more aggressive, more flexible is less aggressive. So it kind of depends on your situation. And then there on the right is a residue termination slash bed prep tool called a Limpkin Rubin. It's a type of speed disc. It has really big, aggressively set discs that you can run through the field at a reasonably high rate of speed. And that can help terminate large amounts of residue in a single pass if used correctly. And it can help prepare a bed for seeding moving into planting season for whatever crop you might have. So, switching gears a little bit and talking about a different type of equipment you might consider for your operation. Um, Dedicated grain storage can be a huge boon for somebody who's transitioning to organic. Grain storage allows you to sell things when it is convenient for you instead of having to truck something immediately out of the field or schedule trucking to come and pick up from you. Especially as your acreage increases, it's really helpful to have some on-farm storage so you can sell things at your convenience. Bins that are used on organic farms must be labeled as organic. and the strategies that you use to keep that bin clean are limited to organic practices such as mechanical methods, sweeping, vacuuming, pressurized air. You may also consider using certain types of organic insecticides like diatomaceous earth, food grade diatomaceous earth in many cases, to mitigate some issues with insects. You are likely to have more insect damage in general within an organic operation from things like weevils, for example, than you would in conventional because you don't have some of those traditional fumigants available to you. But it still is possible to store organic grain cleanly and have that as an option for being able to sell when it is more convenient for you. It's also important to consider your business plan when it comes to organic production. The business plan can be a great way to refer back to what your strategy is for approaching transition and how that fits into your personal farming operation. Um, when constructing a business plan, it is always a good idea to try to find ag lenders and crop insurers that have some familiarity or maybe even a lot of experience with organic production because your lending needs and your insurance needs are going to differ from a conventional farmer. So you can get started with your business plan by using a resource like Sayers Organic Transition Planner. If you are looking for folks who are experienced with lending to organic growers or crop insurers who have more familiarity with USDA's crop insurance programs for organics, your mentor farmers, and some of those connections that you make at industry events are going to be really important for pointing you in the right direction there. So occasionally you'll have different ag lenders, different crop insurers that set up as sponsors at some of these events. So that's a great place to get to know who might be available in this space that will work well with you and your farm. And just a word on kind of determining when your organic transition period starts and finishes. It's a 36-month transition window. So I wanted to provide an example here of what that looks like in practice. So let's say you're farming conventionally and you need to make a post-emergent application of Cobra in a soybean field, and say it's a 40-acre soybean field. It's a little bit on the smaller side to try to, you're trying to get a sense of what organic might look like on one of your smaller fields. So let's say you apply Cobra June 21st of 2025. We're going to consider that the last prohibited synthetic input in this field. So that's when the 36-month transition window begins. So 12 months from then is June 21st of 2026. 24 months is June 21st of 2027. And then by June 21st of 2028, anything that's growing in that field can officially be certified organic and sold as organic. So that's what that transition window looks like. You'll want to be very explicit in your record keeping of when that last prohibited input was. And each of your certifiers that you might consider has slightly different paperwork for what this looks like for tracking field status. But you'll want to track transitional fields, officially certified organic fields, and also your conventional fields on this paperwork so that your certifier can see exactly where you're at in terms of the transition process. So several resources out there to get you started. The resources on the left are provided by SARE, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Organization. So we use SARE resources a lot within Purdue Extension. There's a lot of really great educational materials, evidence-based, put together by experts in the field. So the Organic Transition Planner, the Managing Cover Crops Profitably book, as well as Building Soils for Better Crops can be a good place to start when it comes to thinking about what organic transition might look like on your farm, as well as what to consider when it comes to soil health on your farm. And then on the right-hand side, just a couple of other resources that I have found very helpful over the years. And one of those is the Cover Crops Field Guide that's produced by the Midwest Cover Crops Council that gives some very regionally appropriate advice about cover crop use here in the Midwest. It's not necessarily explicitly geared toward organic growers, but it does give you a good sense of different cover crop species and their characteristics. And then a book on the right is a farmer authored book. Jack Laser is the author of The Organic Grain Grower. And while he is growing at a slightly smaller scale up in New England, he's from New York State, he goes through a whole bunch of different species of small grains and corn and beans and everything in between to kind of give you a practical sense of what it looks like to grow those crops in a row crop situation. So while his scale is smaller and his markets look quite different because the Northeast has some small scale milling infrastructure that we do not have here in the Midwest on quite such a scale, um, I think that's a great place to start for getting a sense of practically what it looks like to try some new crops in your crop rotation. And then just briefly, as we conclude this presentation today, after we've given you this kind of brief overview of what to consider for your organic transition, wanted to highlight that the Indiana Organic Network is the organization that has brought you this webinar today. The Indiana Organic Network, or ION program, is funded through a NIFA ORG Organic Transitions grant. ION seeks to establish a statewide network of organic farmers that facilitates knowledge sharing, community building, and on farm research. And this initiative is geared toward offering essential support to overcoming barriers, guiding organic management decisions, and enhancing practices for building and monitoring soil health. This network is for vegetable producers, forage producers, and grain producers. Anybody who's growing organic can participate in this network. So we encourage you to get involved. Check out our Indiana Organic Network website. Come see us at some of the organic events that we participate in alongside Purdue Extension throughout Indiana, including the Indiana Organic Grain Farmer Meeting, which is coming up in February of 2026, as well as some of the other various events that are happening this summer. Just this coming August, we have several different field days that are supported by ION. So we want to thank you for your attention today. This brief overview of organic transition is just the tip of the iceberg. There's still a lot to consider and a lot of practicalities to manage on your own farm and figuring out what this looks like for you personally. But if you have questions about anything that you'd like a little bit more depth on, or if you'd like to be connected with resources of any kind, we are here for you. So you can find my contact information here at the top, and then Brian's contact information second, and then a couple of websites that could serve as some good jumping off points for you as you're gaining skills and knowledge in this space. So want to thank you for your attention. Brian, do you have any final words to say?
No, I think we covered things well. Like I said, if you do need to get a hold of us, here's our contact information. We can get with you. I'm more specialized on the cover crops and those type of things, probably than the others, but I can work with you on that and get you lined up with who we need to talk to if you got any questions.
Thank you, Brian. And with that, we are going to conclude our recording today.